All right, here we go. This is The Idea. It's a podcast about culture, news, and quite frankly, ideas. David, let me do this correctly. David Heska Wanbli Weiden. Did I do it? Did I get
You
it?
did. Thank you, sir.
Okay. The book is called Winter Counts, and there's a lot of good fiction in the world, and there's even a lot of award-winning fiction. The reason I wanted to talk to you today is because your book dives into a part of America people don't even realize is there. Would be probably a pretty good way to start right there. I believe the synopsis of the book says that the main character is an enforcer on a reservation. You want to kind of unpack what that even means and how this is based on reality, even though it's fiction. Let's start there.
I'd be happy to. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and delighted to talk with you and share some stuff with your viewers. So yeah, I'm David Heska Wanbli Weiden. Probably it's relevant to know that I'm an enrolled citizen of the Sichangu Lakota Nation. In English, that's the Rose Bud Sioux tribe. Rose Bud Sioux tribe, and we are located in South Dakota, South Central South Dakota is where our reservation is. Now, I grew up in Denver, but my people have been there, forever and ever, and I go back there a lot. And I'm a professor of Native American Studies as well in my day job. So I've been teaching this stuff for years, and I'm an attorney. So it's relevant to know that I'm a citizen of my nation. Now, what's an enforcer? The concept of winter counts is the fact that the criminal justice system on Native American reservations is truly messed up. And I'll use that PG term here, okay? It's truly, truly messed up because of a law called the Major Crimes Act, passed in 1885 and still the law of the land in the USA. So there are nearly 600 Native American nations within the boundaries of the US, sovereign independent nations, and yet none of our nations are allowed to prosecute felony crimes that occur on our own lands because of this law that was passed in 1885. And not a lot of folks know about this law. Even politicians and attorneys don't know about it. But when a crime happens, a felony crime on a Native American reservation, and they catch the person, the tribal police have to call up the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's offices, and sometimes the BIA, which is the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and they come in to the reservation and they decide whether or not to investigate and prosecute this felony crime. Well, we know that from the numbers that come from the U.S. government itself, that the FBI declines to prosecute somewhere between 35 and 50% of all felony crimes. We're talking murders. We're talking child abuse cases. We're talking abductions. We're talking rapes. We're talking arson. And the offender is more often than not set free. Now, what happens then? Well, maybe you've got a child that was hurt by a bad person, or your sister or your auntie, and the U.S. government says, sorry, we're not going to prosecute it. You might very well call the person on the reservation that will lay down a beating for a price. And that is my fictional character, Virgil Wounded Horse. He charges $100 for each tooth he knocks out and each bone he breaks. That's his price. So that is the concept of a hired vigilante. And I'll answer the question that I get asked a lot. Do they really exist, Dave? And the answer is yes. All right, I'll stop there.
Okay, well let's go with that right there. So the Rose Bud Reservation, where this, which you partially grew up on, so you've got family there, right? Yes. So you spent a lot of time there. Yes. How big is this? And when you talk about there being no law enforcement, how many people are living there? And I can't remember out of focus. There we go. How many people are living there? And then how much law enforcement, lack of law enforcement? For minor crimes, are they? I mean, is there even anything that happens? Like, let's go there for a minute.
Sure. So the Rosebud Indian Reservation, again, it's in South Dakota, near the border with Nebraska. It is a pretty giant piece of land. It's about the size of Delaware. Now, we have somewhere around 15,000 people living there, but that's a large tract of land. And the Rosebud Sioux tribe has its own police department, has its own court system, has its own jail. Now, the police department, they have, I've traveled there. I've talked to their chief of police. I've done a lot of research there. They have about 25 patrol officers, 4 or 5 detectives, three or four, six others. So maybe 30 people, 30, 40 tops that patrol the entire reservation. And of course, they're on different shifts. They're not all on at
Yeah.
the same time. So they're dealing a lot of the time with what any police department deals with, right? Domestic disputes, drunk driving, disorderly conduct. So they need help. So that's number one. The U.S. government has a treaty obligation to fund law enforcement on reservations. We need more police officers. We need more funding. People don't know this, but the federal government, they give money to cities. I mean, Phoenix, Arizona got like $3 million a year or two ago. So the U.S. government funds local law enforcement, but they're not funding us very much. So that's problem one. But problem two is this Major Crimes Act, because our local law enforcement is shut out of the picture for a felony crime. Felony crime is any crime that is punishable by a year or more in jail. Okay,
Yeah.
so the serious crimes,
Yeah.
and we don't get to prosecute those. That's a violation of our independence as native nations. So we've got two separate problems involving criminal justice on reservations.
Yeah. Wow. And so let me just say that back to you, because that's kind of a shocking stat. So something the size of a small state is patrolled by about 30 officers. And then
right.
if something serious happens, maybe nothing happens whatsoever.
There are two FBI agents that come into our reservation, and they have the sole exclusive authority to investigate and prosecute felony crimes. It's not enough agents. And so about half of the time, the offenders just get set free. So it's a huge mess, and it's contributing to this problem called MMIW, missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so that's a big problem that's getting a lot of press these days. And a lot of people haven't connected the dots, which is that the Major Crimes Act, this really bad, federal law, is contributing to that issue. So,
holy cow.
Yeah.
This is the second time I've seen it dealt with. The first time was through Taylor Sheridan's movie. Which one is that one?
Wind River.
Wind River. There we go. I'm a pretty big fan. I don't know what your thoughts are on him. I'm a pretty big fan of almost everything he's done, going back to like Sons of Anarchy, right? What I love about the fact that these two projects exist is that, documentaries are good, but they're only seen by a small number of people. And normally when you put something in fiction, it just gets a lot more attention, because it's like more fun, it's more entertaining. As much as I would, as we all love to say, like, oh, I love to learn or whatever, most people love to be entertained more. And so the first novel, like you said, you're a lawyer and professor, you've kind of got enough to do. What made you do this, or what made you, because there isn't, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is there isn't anything else like this that I've seen in movies or fiction or anything like that.
Well, thank you so much. You're exactly right. I'm a tenured professor, and I write a lot of these little academic articles that, maybe specialists in the field will read them. Maybe 50, 100 people will read them. I did co-author a book on the U.S. Supreme Court about, 15 years ago. That got a little bit of play. But, the thing is, you're absolutely right. In the popular culture narrative, fiction, movies, literature, TV, that's where you're going to reach the people. And I've always been obsessed with literature, and I wanted to be a writer all of my life, but I grew up very, in pretty bad poverty. And so I did what every poor kid does. It's like, oh, I hear lawyers make money, so I became a lawyer, but then my kids were born about 18 years ago. And I said, I better do this. If I'm going to be a writer, if I'm going to try my hand at it, I need to do this now. And so I took all of these concepts that I'd been studying and teaching for about 2 decades, and I poured them into the book. And I'm really happy to say the book came out about 3.5 years ago, and I was very scared because it came out in the first wave of the pandemic. Every bookstore in America was shut down, and I was worried. The book, however, did become a national bestseller, and for a period of time, there was really a real national dialogue on this issue. I know because I got literally hundreds of calls. I heard from congressional staffers. I heard from a federal judge who wanted to meet with me. I heard from hundreds of people, because I also published an article in the New York Times on this issue, and that has a circulation of 10 million people. So the book, I think, it really contributed, I think, to kind of opening up the dialogue. That and a Supreme Court decision called McGirt, which I won't get into right now, happens in 2020. So I'm hoping that things will continue to happen. There's been a really important lawsuit in the Pine Ridge Reservation, which is right next to ours. So I think things are starting to happen. And that really is the power of literature and art. So I'll
Yeah.
stop there.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And that, I loved Wind River as a film, but that really is it's an outsider movie because it's actually about the FBI agents that you just mentioned, that there's a couple of them that come in. By the way,
Yeah.
I'm guessing a decent portion of my audience has seen that. What did you, as far as, aside from what you thought of the actual movie or acting or whatever, what did you think as far as kind of the accuracy of the reality on the ground, of like that portrayed?
It's been some years since I saw the film, and
Yeah.
I remember I did like it. I mean, putting aside some of the problems, I would have liked to have seen the film shot from the perspective of the native character instead of the
Yeah.
non-native character. But putting that aside, I thought it was pretty accurate. For those of you who don't remember, Wind River dealt with something called the man camps. So the man camps are these giant camps of workers that usually exist up north around the pipelines and energy developments. And the thought for a long time for this phenomenon of missing and murdered Indigenous women is that the man camps are the main driver of this. You got like 800 men that are bored and distracted. And so they might go out and find a native woman and, do bad things to her. And so that was really the chief hypothesis for a long time about what's causing missing and murdered Indigenous women. The problem is, and I don't disagree with that, missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is something that is, been a big problem for decades in the US and Canada. Native American women have a much higher chance of being abducted and never found again than any other group. But the problem with the man camp hypothesis is that these women are being abducted from areas that are nowhere near the man camps. So there's something else going on. It's not just the man camps. So if that makes sense here, I liked the movie. I thought it shone a light, it
Yeah.
shined a light on a problem in American society that is happening. So I did like that. But the problem is more complicated than just a bunch of bad oil field workers.
Yeah,
So
yeah, a bunch of just frustrated, whatever, oil rig guys.
yeah.
Man, there's a lot there. So,
No.
what can you unpack as far like? Can you give us a number? Because I think that's one of the things that's difficult about this is we don't even know how many people are missing. Do you have any idea there on a number? And then, what's your theory about what's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the most up to date numbers, but I know as of like 7-8 years ago, at least 5 to 6,000, mainly women, but it's not just women. Sometimes it's boys, sometimes it's men, but I mean, probably more often than not women. 5 to 6,000 had been abducted and presumed murdered or found murdered, and again, happening in Canada a lot as well.
Yeah,
And that's where the first movement of studying this started to happen. What do I think is happening here? I think it's a combination of things. I think it's the man camps. I think certainly that's a factor there. And there's some research out there that does show a correlation with man camps and missing women, missing Native women. I think the Major Crimes Act has a big part to do with this. And I think, there are other factors as well. Like, again, criminal justice not being adequately funded on Native reservations. We have money to support countries around the world. That's great. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. But let's also support the first inhabitants of this continent and let's do what we promised them. So again, there is a treaty obligation to support criminal justice on reservations. And
yeah.
and so, that's part of the answer as well.
Yeah. Dang it! I don't know why that webcam keeps going out. Out of focus there. I may have to swap it out to a different piece of hardware there. But apologies if you're just listening. That makes no sense. So 5. That's one of the things that hit me. The book hit me on was like there's no media coverage around this. I know you said you wrote for the New York Times, but I'm just thinking back. Do you remember that young woman that was like doing the van life thing with her boyfriend, and he killed her in a national park or something like that?
I
I can't
do.
remember, like weeks and weeks and weeks of coverage. And so,
Yeah.
there are certain cases that are super interesting to the media or drive clicks or whatever it is that like get, and that was unfortunately a fairly, sadly, as far as murders go, fairly commonplace, like, woman married or murdered by a romantic partner, right?
Oh,
Fairly
right.
commonplace. I don't know what happened between the two of them. He killed her. He got caught.
He killed
Maybe
himself.
and did he kill himself? Okay, yeah,
He did. Yeah.
but like weeks or months of coverage.
Yeah.
And then you're telling me these huge numbers. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about the book is just that, do you ever see this in the press? Does anybody try to get more media on this? Because it seems like this would be one of the like true big issues in the United States, and it just gets shrugged at, I guess.
Well, this points at a larger problem for Native peoples is we are often called the invisible minority, okay? Because, think about it. I tell my students in my classes, I'm like, watch some TV, watch the commercials, okay? And, in commercials, you'll see people of all different ethnicities, you know, selling detergent, whatever, except
Yeah.
for one. You will never see a Native person just like, I love the new Tide, you won't see that. The only time you see us in the media is, for the most part, if it's like some old Western show, think of the movie Dance with Wolves or something like that, then we pop up. Now, there are a handful of shows. Reservation Dogs was a great show. It's ended. And my friend Craig Johnson, who writes the Longmire books, and that was a great series. He's got some great Native characters. So there are exceptions, okay?
Yeah.
But we are fairly invisible in the general culture. And so I think what that means is Native Americans are usually just not newsworthy. All right. And that's a sad thing. And that's why I'm so thrilled that Winter Counts did so well. Now, I'll share with you something else. Until Winter Counts was published in 2020, no Native American crime fiction author had published with what we call the Big Five in publishing. The Big Five are the five big New York publishing companies. No Native American author had published a crime novel with the Big Five. Now, there had been non-Native authors, Tony Hillerman and others, that had written crime books about Natives, but they're not Native themselves, if you get what I'm saying here. So for some reason, we Native writers had been shut out of the Big Five. So I'll show the book again when this is the American cover. I've sold it. It's available in 5 or 6 different countries, but this is the American cover. I wasn't filled with a lot of confidence that it would sell, but it did. It did. HarperCollins bought it, and the book had a huge impact. Now, where I'm going with this is, since then, there have been about 7, 8, 10 Native American writers that write crime fiction that have been signed to the Big Five. What I'm getting at here, there's a market. People want to read crime fiction, and not just crime fiction, horror fiction, speculative fiction, you name it, that is written by people of all different groups, especially Indigenous people. So, I'm so thrilled that the book did well because it has opened the door for other Native American crime writers. So I think we're going to see a real flowering. These books are now just starting to hit the market. And if in some small way Winter Counts helped open that door, I'm really thrilled.
Yeah. One of the things I think is really cool here is I remember as a kid, so I'm 41, so I grew up, kind of earliest memories would be late 80s, early 90s, right? I remember, which is a little different than the issue you're talking about being hidden, but I remember that the fact that there was almost nothing that I would see myself in the media, because almost everything, including like crime or police shows, were just New York or LA. Maybe Miami, you know what I mean? Like, it was just those. And I remember that being such a big deal. Believe it or not, I grew up in West Central Illinois, and season 1 of the comedy Roseanne was actually set like fictionally, like an hour from where I grew up. And for the most part, like, I kind of got it. Like, I kind of got the characters. And that, even though I didn't watch the reboot or anything like that, I don't get a lot of TV time these days with 2 preschool age kids. But dang it, that mattered to me. Like, it mattered that there was actually something out there that made sense. I also love here that like, your main character is like a cool guy. He's fun. He's essentially like a private investigator slash fighting dude. So it's not just like tragedy porn. It's not just like, well, this is so
Yeah.
sad. Like it's fun and it keeps moving. You mentioned the Longmire series. That is a show on Netflix. I only watched a couple episodes, but I've read multiple of the books, and really would recommend that series as well. But I guess after Westerns fell off, it's like, kind of like maybe the 1960s, it wasn't just Westerns that fell off. It was any kind of storytelling in, I guess, what's deemed flyover country. Like it just sort of went away.
Absolutely right. Quick side note. I lived in Normal, Illinois for a number of years. In fact, my son was born there. Now that's more central Illinois, but
Yeah.
anyway, so I know central Illinois fairly well, as a matter of fact. So just as a quick side note.
Oh, did you teach did you teach or study at Illinois State? Or?
I taught at Illinois State. That's right. I sure did.
Oh, very cool. So, okay, I've actually had a chance. I adjuncted. I've had a chance to speak there and that type of thing. So definitely not the same as teaching, but super cool. Yeah. And so you get it that like the rest of Illinois that's not Chicago actually has like an actual culture. It's not often shown, which is the same thing that I see here. It's like it's actually cool to show this is a place people don't think, maybe don't think about that much, and it has like an actual culture beyond just like sadness, which is unfortunately how this is portrayed sometimes.
Yeah, that was an issue. Portraying the reservation was the part of the book that I was most nervous about, because I knew that most of my readers probably have never been on a Native American reservation. And even if they had been, they probably hadn't been to ours, the Rose Bud Reservation in South Dakota, because we're not well known. Okay. And so so I felt a real duty to write about it and really develop what it's like to live on a reservation and be honest, but also positive. We do have a lot of problems on our reservation. I'm not going to lie. We have a problem with meth is a problem. We have, our unemployment rate on the Rose Bud Reservation is 85%. 85%. There aren't jobs on our reservation. And, so there's a lot of poverty. And I mean, in the Great Depression in America, what was the unemployment rate was 25% and people were jumping off of buildings. We've got 85%. So it's a tough place to live, and that leads to crime. People are hungry, so I felt a duty to be honest, but also to be positive and not just write what we call poverty porn, right?
Yeah.
But talk about the joy, the humor, the resilience of Native people, especially on our reservation. And so I got pretty good reviews, in fact, great reviews, including from people on my reservation. So I feel good about that. So hopefully I pulled it off.
No, that's super cool. I come from a very different background than you, but a lot of some overlap of what you just said. I was born in, I believe at the time was the third poorest county in the state of Illinois. And it had lost in the 80s, had lost quite a few manufacturing jobs. And then in the 90s that got worse with NAFTA and that type of thing. But in 2022, I actually had 5 former basketball teammates that were arrested on some sort of meth-related charges. Which is just hard, and I think 3 of them had kind of gone through the foster care system, which is going to increase the odds of something like that happening. And I think that it's funny how stereotypes are okay in certain circumstances. WGN, which is one of the biggest TV stations in the country, one of their big news producers when I was working PR said, "I can't believe you grew up on a farm. You're so well spoken." I'm like, did you just say you're surprised I know how to read? Because any other category other than growing up rural that you said that, you would be out of a job like today? Like, I kind of can't believe we got to have that discussion, right? And so it's, I think about Shannon County, Missouri, which is a popular tourist destination, which I believe the median income there is like $19,000, right? And I think if you live in if you've always lived in the suburbs or you live in a major city, you're like, well, those places are so sad. They have nothing. In reality, they're vibrant places with economic challenges. And a lot of times they're more interesting as far as local culture because not everything's a dang Applebee's or a Marvel movie, to be honest. And so I love it when anybody can show that.
Well, thank you. I agree. I mean, there is such a focus sometimes in Hollywood, just on, New York or LA. Occasionally Boston, maybe, I guess, Chicago occasionally, but let's do more of that. I mean, I will share with you that I have sold the film and TV rights to Winter Counts twice now. Um, Unfortunately, for reasons that I don't understand myself,
Yeah.
they've been unable to get the show off the ground, but you never know. There's still hope
Oh,
that at
it's
some point Virgil Wounded Horse could end up on the big screen or the small screen. I mean, at this point, I'm thinking, hey, some middle school kids out there want to get their cell phones. I'll sell it to them. They give me their lunch money and some Lunchables, and hey, let's shoot it, kids. So,
well, unfortunately, like even the Uncharted movie. Did you see that one? It's kind of an Indiana Jones-ish type thing that Mark Wahlberg was in a couple years
no.
ago. Okay, it was just it's based on a Sony video game, and it's not a particularly good film. So you can, I mean, if you're on a plane, you can watch it, but I'm not telling you to run out and check it out this weekend.
Okay.
But I believe that was a 20-year development, and so Mark Wahlberg actually aged out of the main character because he wanted to make the movie so bad, and then had to become the mentor. So just because it's
Okay.
not happening right now does not mean that it's not coming, unfortunately. And I've had friends that have done this, sold something 2 or 3 or 4 times in a row. Hollywood is just slow, as much as like you think that Hollywood's instantly reacting and trying to copy what just happened. The cycle is years and years and years. And if you sold it off your first book, the fact that this is going to become a series is very good news.
Well, I don't know that it is. Like I said, they both times we thought things were going to happen and then it got dropped. So I don't know that it's going to be a series, but it has sold twice.
Well, no, the book's
what's called
an
an
option
option
is what I meant. So you're probably gonna have a shot to get it
book
optioned
series,
again.
book series. Okay, so not TV series. Yeah. It was going to be a TV series as well. Yes, the book is going to be a series. So I do have the next book is called Wisdom Corner, and we're looking at 2025 for that. And I'm very excited. So yes, that it's absolutely going to be a series if readers still continue to like Virgil and all that. And I should note a couple other things. I have a collection, an anthology, I guess the correct word, of Native writers. It's called Native Noir, and it's probably the greatest roster of Native American writers ever. And not all of them are crime writers, mystery writers, but they were tasked with writing a mystery story. And so that is coming out from Akashic Books, I think 2025 as well. So people like crime fiction and cool short stories. That's coming out. And I'm also the editor for the University of New Mexico Press. They have a series called Native Edge. And so I find cool Native writers and I help them get published. Our first release came out a couple of months ago called Indians One by Martin Cruz Smith, who people may remember his great novel and movie Gorky Park. He's actually a native writer. He's a native writer. And he wrote this book a long time ago, but it went out of print. We got the rights to it and we're reissuing it. So what I'm trying to tell you is I can't control Hollywood and what they do, but I can control what's happening on my end of it. And I'm going to continue to write stories involving Virgil Wounded Horse, as well as help get other native writers and their work out there.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I will say, this probably does. I'm actually a former kind of TV and movie critic and feature writer and that type of thing, to where I would get invites to get flown out and that type of thing. And this probably doesn't help my career if I try to pitch anything, but Hollywood is neither brave nor smart, in my opinion. They tend to want to copy things. And so sometimes that in order for somebody to just have the guts to greenlight something, they just have to see it go for a while. I do think it's actually cool though. Everybody complains about the lack of original films and stuff these days. Everything's sequel, prequel, whatever. That's not actually true, because there is just more and more books that are being adapted. And it makes sense from a business model because of the fact that something, like you're not taking as much of a risk on the script. This resonated with somebody. And so the more you publish, the more likely it is that they're going to not be able to say no. I'm not an expert, but that's just what I see here.
Hey, I agree with all of it, and there has been a real renaissance lately. The Rutherford Falls was a pretty cool show on Peacock that dealt with Native issues. And I've mentioned Reservation Dogs, an amazing series that everybody loved. And, so we'll see what happens. But again, I only control what is in front of me. So I'm fine. Anybody out there is listening, contact my film agent, we can make something happen.
Yeah. No, that's super legit, man. And that's, I mean, just as somebody who just, I just grabbed the book because it was on sale on Amazon and it looked good. Like I didn't have the introduction to you as a writer or anything. And you know, sometimes you buy 4 different novels for whatever they are, $7 each or something
Sure.
like that, and you abandon 2 or 3 of them trying to find the good one. And within
Sure.
the first chapter, this
Sure.
one hit me pretty well. It's something I hadn't read anything else like this before. And I think a lot of times if you kind of do like a lot of like, mysteries, thrillers, whatever, you're like, oh, all right, I know this plot. But this wasn't it. I'm curious, you said it was published in 5 countries. Like, what does like a British audience think of this? Like,
It was chosen as one of the 5 best books of the year by Financial Times and The Guardian. In fact, I think The Guardian called it its top crime novel of the year of British authors, everyone. So it seemed to really resonate over there, surprisingly enough. The Germans loved it as well. The French, I went to a French festival about a year ago, and I sold out. I must have signed 1,000 books, so they seem to like it. And Japan is the only country that I don't know. They sent me a cool copy of my book, but I've never heard hide nor hair from any Japanese journalists or anything. So, I mean, yeah, people seem, across the world seem to relate to this character.
that's interesting. I guess I don't think that much about what kind of media Europeans consume. I guess I just assume
Yeah.
Germans just listen to EDM and wear tracksuits or, whatever the stereotype is. Um, so I'd never thought about like, I know that things like there are certain projects like the girl with the dragon tattoo that, that was big in Scandinavia and then became an American project.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't think about like what American things were big over there. We just think about like what British band comes over here. It is cool or whatever it is. Right. Fascinating that, that they want to kind of step into our world and our continent, I guess, if you will. But that's
Well,
really
if you
cool.
watch Netflix, I'm sorry if I cut you off.
No,
If you watch Netflix,
it.
if you watch Netflix, in between writing binges, I turn on the TV and just try to chill out for a bit. I'm noticing there are a huge amount of TV shows on Netflix now that are huge hits that came from other countries. What was that? Squid Game? That was what, a Korean TV show, but
Yeah.
there are a bunch of them, and so I am seeing the boundaries beginning to dissolve, and maybe for a long time they've always been consuming our stuff, but I see that we're watching their stuff as well. So hey, it's good news all the way around.
Yeah, good stuff. I mean, good stuff, I guess, finds an audience. Even it seems like Americans have kind of turned the corner on reading subtitles. That show Dark on Netflix, which I believe is in German, was kind of a big, like, kind of mystery thriller type thing that I think really hit. Obviously, there's like multiple South Korean pop culture, particularly like Gen Z, is really hit. So it makes sense that I guess things go back and forth across the borders. I just hadn't thought about like Europeans reading American fiction or being into it, which is cool. Yeah.
I'm really grateful for, all of my readers. And I will say the Netflix shows, at least the ones I'm watching, they're dubbing them in with English, so I turn on the English voice feature just because I'm too lazy myself to read the subtitles, but I often will go back and just listen to the original cut so I can hear what the original actors, what their voices sound like, even if I don't understand the language.
Oh, interesting.
But no,
Okay.
I really have loved, I really have loved a lot of these cool crime series that I'm seeing, come from all over the place. So anyway, good stuff.
Yeah, no. Well, and I mean, because I watched like everything that was coming out the week it dropped or whatever for so long because I was doing that as a freelancer writing on the side, and now I just know a lot about like Paw Patrol and Bluey for the next 5 years. That's kind of the majority of my my TV media diet. I do want to shift into,
Sure.
I guess what the audience doesn't, I guess how many stories out there the audience maybe has not encountered, because one of the things that kind of connects my world to your world is that my great grandfather either quit or got kicked out of his pre-med program, possibly over a fist fight in the 1890s, over in Valparaiso University. That'd be pretty close to where you're at Normal. Actually went out, and he was one of the last open range cowboys in Montana. And so like he existed out there, what I call like the very tail end of the old world, where like phones and cars were starting to
Mm.
pop up and that type of thing. And he made friends with some of the Lakota families who were resisting the reservation system in Montana, who kind of were able to like stay out longer. And I think eventually they got forced in. And this would have been after the Battle of Little Bighorn and all, kind of when you think of like the Old West era ending. And he wrote letters with some of those families for the rest of his life after he came back to Illinois. And it just seems like there's so much there that like, and I've never read that in a book. I just know because he did it, right? And I always wonder like about those families and how many lost pieces. We kind of have a handful of books that most of us wind up reading in high school or college, like, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee and that type of thing. And then that becomes the narrative. And I always thought about, my great grandfather, my second daughter's named after him, Emery, Emery. And great grandfather Emery, I always think about like, man, nobody ever wrote that down. Like whatever happened to those families or whatever, I'm sure their descendants know, but the country will never know. They just think, battle a little bit, a couple of last battles with the Lakota in particular and the Apache. And then essentially that was the end of that world. And it doesn't seem like it was just, there's a clear line there. It seemed like there's a lot of stories on the transition to the modern world. Like, do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, there is I sure do. I'm a professor of Native American Studies, so I could talk for the next 6 hours on this, except everybody would be like, please tell them to shut up. But I mean, so, you're bringing up a couple of different things here. So the Lakota people, we resisted going to the reservation. So if your listeners don't know this, the reservations were really prison camps. Okay. They're not like today where you can come and go freely. We were forbidden from leaving the reservation. And if you left the boundaries of the reservation, you were jailed, okay, for a year or more. So they were prison camps, really, okay? And we didn't go willingly, we were forced. I mean, the Trail of Tears is one of the terrible things in American history. The Cherokees were forced literally to walk from Georgia to leave their ancestral land that they'd had for 100,000 years and walk to Oklahoma, where 3,000 of them died, literally, like babies would die and the soldiers would say, keep walking. They'd have to leave their babies, dead babies, by the side of the road. So we didn't go willingly. Okay. And once we got there, we couldn't leave. So the Lakotas, we fought, a lot of us, and tried to not go. And a good number of Lakota bands went up to Canada to try to escape. But it was a very brutal winter in the late 1800s. And there was a movement called the Ghost Dance that was starting to happen. The Ghost Dance, there was a native prophet called Wovoka, and he had this vision that if native people could start to dance this certain dance and wear a certain shirt, that we would regain our land back, that we would get what had been taken from us, and not have to go to the reservations. And P.S., the reservation system had a fan who really, really admired it. His name was Adolf Hitler. He really loved the reservation system, and he borrowed that from us. Not exactly a point of pride. So anyway, back to Avoca. So there was a band, and I wonder if your grandfather was, or great grandfather,
great grandfather was out there.
Had some contact. So they were up in Montana, but there was no food in this terrible winter. And so they started making their way down. They heard that if you can make it to South Dakota, the Pine Ridge Reservation, they'll give you food and they'll take you in. But the U.S. government was afraid of this ghost dance. They thought that the natives were going to become hostile again. So they had sent out army troops, to find anybody that was practicing the ghost dance and arrest them. So indeed, this group of about nearly dead, hungry, sick native Lakota people were captured by the army, and they took all of the natives' weapons, but one rifle goes off, and we don't know how. And we believe it was because he was deaf. He was hearing impaired, one of the Lakota people, and the rifle goes off. And so the soldiers just start firing upon these people who are unarmed. This is the Wounded Knee Massacre. And so it's one of the greatest shames in American history. The Wounded Knee Massacre, they killed, they literally would chase after 2-year-old babies and shoot them in the back of the head. They massacred everyone, 200 to 300 natives. That's the line. We call the Wounded Knee Massacre the line because word spread throughout the world, the Indian world, that the American government is willing to massacre us. And so everybody went willing to leave to the reservation. So we call that the line, where our way of life, which we'd had for tens of thousands of years ended on that day. So again, history lesson in a quick 3 minutes.
No, it connects pretty well to the novel because one of the things that I find just to be one of the dumbest things that has ever happened is that the federal government took control of geographically most of the western United States and put it under the Bureau of Land Management, and most of it just sits there. It's not public access. Nobody gets to do anything with it. It's just empty. And there's not that many people compared to the East Coast. There's obviously not that many people, west of the Mississippi. And also, we killed a bunch of people to take their land to just do nothing with it, which is just the dumbest. And we can't even open it up for recreation for whatever reason. It just, for the most part, huge sections of Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, they just sit. There's nothing done with them. And I guess it's one of those things we get different policy if anybody paid attention to it, but it's not a very sexy topic.
Well, we contend that land is still ours. So the Treaty of 1868. So the only time the U.S. Army has been defeated on American soil, it was called Red Cloud's War. And Red Cloud, Lakota, for a while there, we were fierce fighters, us, the Comanches, and we were just killing the American soldiers and the settlers that were on our land that had been promised us, And finally,
if the revolver and the repeating rifle hadn't come about, the West would have never been taken.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the technology got better, but the Treaty of 1868, the government put out a call to the Lakota, said, "Hey, will you meet with us?" And we agreed. And so about a third of the West was given to us, pretty much all of Wyoming and Nebraska and North Dakota, South Dakota. And they said, "We promise you that's your land forever. We will never, ever take that if you stop killing us." So we signed it in good faith. Of course, 2 years later or 3 years later, gold is discovered in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Well, that ended that. So they broke the treaty immediately. So, but we contend that treaty is still good. Now, what are we going to do? Ask the entire city of Omaha to leave their houses? That ship has probably sailed. But we contend that's our land. So
yeah. No, that's and right now it's just sort of nobody's land. It's like the taxpayer gets the privilege of paying for nobody to get to use it, which is the worst of all possible worlds. Going into, and we got to wrap here, and I know you got stuff to do, and it's, it's Friday, probably looking to get your weekend started, but going into back to the kind of the poverty issue in reservations and how you're writing about this, obviously we see how we got there, right? Because these places these populations were forced into places that were not going to produce jobs, for one thing. 85% unemployment rate. What are you're a writer and a history professor, not an economist necessarily, but what can be done there? Because I refuse to just think that some people just have to be stuck in 85% poverty. There's got to be ways to get things into under-resourced areas, including the Rose Bud Reservation. So you got any ideas there?
I most certainly do. And a quick correction: I'm not a history professor. I do have a PhD. I'm a political scientist. So I'm trained in statistics. Okay. So economics and political science, we're in the same boat. So I'm an attorney, a political scientist, and I do have an MFA degree in literature. And so I was able, in writing Winter Counts, to draw from law, from politics, and from literature. And my kid is following in my footsteps. I have my 18-year-old, he's 19 now, is in his first year of college. He's at Dartmouth studying Native American studies. So he's all excited. I talked to him yesterday. He's reading this stuff now that he'd been, "Oh, Dad, you're so boring." But now he's his mind is just exploding. He loves it. He can't wait to call me. All right. So what's going on? What can we do? I'm guessing that a lot of your listeners, viewers, don't know what the General Allotment Act is. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a reason why we can't get business going on the reservation is because we don't own our land. Okay. Native Americans don't own our land. It's held in trust for us by the U.S. government. On the reservation, I own, and I'm doing the air quotes for anybody who's just listening and not watching. I own 3 pieces of land, but that land, I can't sell it. I can't visit it. I can't build on it. It's controlled by the U.S. government in trust. They rent it out to 3 white ranchers. I get rent every 6 months from the white ranchers. My last check was $1.29, okay, every 6 months. So we don't own our land. Now, the reason for this is complicated. there was a case from the U.S. Supreme Court called Johnson versus McIntosh, which said Native Americans have no title to their lands because they're not Christians. That's a problem right there. Look it up, Johnson versus McIntosh. And then the General Allotment Act came in, and it came to our reservation, and they divided it into these little plots. And they gave 160 acres to Native men over the age of 18, okay? But that left a lot of plots, which they then gave out to the white folks to come in. So a lot of reservations, half of it is controlled by white ranchers, farmers, etc. But the plots that were given to us, we don't actually own. It's called trust land. Now, if you don't own the land, you can't use it as collateral to go create a business. Okay. So that's just one problem of many. How about letting us actually own our land so we can then use that as collateral and, start like some cool businesses? So, we could go on and on and on, but there are a whole bunch of injustices that I find people are surprised by, not the least of which, on a slightly different topic, our religion was outlawed and made a criminal offense until 1978. Anybody who practiced our ceremonies, our traditions, could be jailed until the year 1978. So, the U.S. government has a long history of treating natives. And remember, we've been citizens, U.S. citizens, since 1924. But
I was going to say
the First Amendment.
The First Amendment didn't apply. What I was going to say there is
Right.
around the 1920s thing, legally weren't most native citizens actually legally children for their entire lives because they didn't have full citizenship? Isn't that like the legal definition kind of previous to that?
I'm surprised you know about this. Yeah, so this is a famous case in what's called the Marshall Trilogy. And the Justice Marshall of the U.S. Supreme Court in the early 1800s said Native nations are not true independent nations. Rather, they are domestic dependent nations. And he said, think of Native citizens as like that of as a ward to the guardian. So in other words, we're like children, okay? They can't make our own decisions, which is, outrageous. But starting in 1924, we were made full American citizens, and yet we were still somehow excluded from the protections of the Constitution. So there are a whole bunch of problems here, and I don't want to just rant and rant and rant.
Yeah.
The good news is I think that eyes are being opened, not just me, but there's a whole army of Native Indigenous writers, artists, thinkers, out there that are talking about this. And I do think things are starting to change. It may not happen in my lifetime, but I think we're going to see things start to turn around, that some of these laws that are holding us back are going to be changed. That's my hope anyway.
Well, let's go out on just a couple questions in that
Sure.
vein. The first thing is, so I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, 5 or 6 hours from some of the Oklahoma reservations. The first thing is there anything like as far as like people's consumer habits or stopping through on vacation to kind of, learn more, like just as far as average Joe consumer, average Joe and Jane consumer, is it helpful, like as far as tourism dollars and that type of thing? And apart from cultural enrichment to visit reservations, or does it not do much? Not really.
So here's the thing. Of course, we welcome traveler dollars,
but it's not going to, it's not going to change everything.
It's not even that. It's just that a lot of reservations, there's not much to see. Okay. Even my own kids, we live in Denver, but we go there a lot. And when my kids were young, they would I don't want to go there, Dad. There's nothing to do, and, so there aren't on my reservation, which again is the size of Delaware, we have 3 restaurants. Okay. We don't have a movie theater. There's nothing to do. There is a casino. We have a small, sad casino. It's great, but it's small and it's not exactly like Vegas. So, now, some reservations do have some pretty cool stuff, okay, but ours, some of the lesser known reservations, there may not be stuff unless you're a history buff and you want to visit like a battle site or something. But please, yes, visit reservations. Just be respectful and all that. We would welcome your dollars. So.
No, that's interesting. The last thing I wanted to ask you about, just in because the novels are really about a guy. And his brother and kind of his social network that their backs are all against the wall, and that's kind of where they live, right? Do you think that there could have been anything different because you study this? Until Andrew Jackson, things were at least more mixed as far as the different, kind of how the colonies of the United States government treated, the native nations that were here. Andrew Jackson sort of shot everything to hell, right? It being, do you see 2 or 3 different events that maybe could have gone differently that would produce a different outcome, to where a book like Winter Counts, about how there's no policing, no resources in these places, like, could have been different?
Well, it started before Jackson. Let's just be clear. Jackson was certainly probably the most hated of all American presidents for natives, but yeah, okay. I mean, I'm going to come back to that case that I talked about a minute ago. So it's called the Marshall Trilogy. John Marshall was considered to be one of the greatest justices of the U.S. Supreme Court, and he comes out with 3 cases in early 1800s. And the first one was a banger, Johnson versus McIntosh, where he said natives don't have original title. They have a right of occupancy that the government can withdraw if it wants to, but we don't actually have the title to our lands, okay, because of something called the doctrine of discovery. Doctrine of discovery is a legal doctrine invented by the Catholic Church that if a Christian person comes to lands that are inhabited by non-Christians, when that first Christian steps foot on the lands, he gets the title, or his country does, his or her country, because non-Christians don't have any rights. Okay. What they get, the exchange, is they get Christianity. Okay. That's the exchange. Okay. Well, it's obviously problematic to incorporate this religious doctrine, as far as the First Amendment. But if Johnson versus McIntosh had not been decided that way, we might have been able to control our lands, and there could have been, a true partnership, instead of us just being, brutally forced onto these reservations. And even when we got to the reservations, they continued to take our land and kill us while we were there, So that was number one. I'd have to think what number 2 would be. Probably.
What about? I mean, what if Tecumseh would have been successful in 1812? Because Tecumseh fought on the side of the Canadians and British, trying to force Michigan and Ohio, I believe, to be Indian states with representation in Congress, right? So, well,
let me take
if we would have lost the war there, go for it.
So this book that I mentioned earlier, The Indians Won.
Yeah.
So it's just been released. University of Mexico Press, Martin Cruz Smith. It's the first Native American alternative history book. So it's fiction. And in it, Martin Cruz Smith says, what if the native nations back in the early years of America, what if the native nations had banded together instead of fighting each other with these traditional rivalries? What if they had recognized the threat that was coming from across the ocean, and they'd banded together and really fought? And what if they'd won? So in the book, it says, it posits, what if the French had given weapons to the natives, and the natives had cooperated and had been able to defeat the Europeans? So in the book, it's got 2 timelines, the 1800s, where the natives fight and defeat the Europeans, and then the 1970s, when most of the North American continent is controlled by natives. It's called the Indian Nation. The USA is on the coasts. The USA is confined to the West Coast and the East Coast. And the Indian Nation has nuclear weapons, And so it's really fascinating if natives had banded together, but instead these traditional rivalries played too much of a part. And, but yeah, you wonder what would have happened, because, in the early years of the country, when we were on equal footing technology-wise, natives were clearly the superior fighting force in the 1700s, early 1800s, but, that quickly ended.
Yeah. Yeah. This is super cool. We got a year wait. I'm hoping that some of your existing fans pick this up on YouTube. So can you give us a little bit on where the next book's going? If you've already read it, if not, read the first one, then you'll have a little bit of a preview of how this is going to go. So don't spoil the first one, but give us a little bit of something.
Sure. So in Wisdom Corner, the next book in the series, Virgil Wounded Horse wants to stop being a vigilante, a hired vigilante. So he's trying to stop, okay? But an event happens that forces him back into it. And I won't reveal what that event is, but other things happen. Marie, his girlfriend, and I won't do some spoilers here, she's running for tribal council. Nathan, his nephew, who he is raising as his own son, is 14, and he wants to grow up and be a vigilante like his uncle. And Virgil doesn't want that. He wants his kid to go to college, and so there's a lot of cool stuff. I promise you, if you loved Winter Counts or you liked it, it's more of the same, but there's some cool new characters, and some interesting new plot twists as well.
Yeah. Okay. David Heska Wanbli Weiden. The book is Winter Counts. On my Substack, I do a biannual kind of best of. I named this the best of 2024 because, well, I mean, it doesn't come out till July, but I named it even though it's 4 years late because that's when I read it. So, you know, I'm not as cool as the New York Times or the Guardian, but you know, that it definitely is something that hit me and would highly recommend it. And it's super fascinating. There's just this whole world that you unpacked for us. So thanks for the time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time from you, and to listeners and viewers, thank you. I really mean it. Thank you all.
Let me just save that